Hi there, viewers, and welcome to the Repair It, Don't Wreck It channel. Today we're working on a 2010 Ford Fusion SLE model. It has the big 2.5 liter engine. The complaint that I have is the brakes pulsate when they get real hot when traveling in some mountainous areas. During light city driving, I get a grabbing sensation as I come to a full stop. I'm going to take the brakes apart to see what the problem is. I went ahead and bought new pads and rotors anyways. The last time I did a brake job, I just replaced the pads and kept the rotors. I'm pretty sure the rotors are warped. It's time for a complete overhaul. The first thing is to jack up the car at the specified location on the rocker panel. Check your manual for this location. Here I'm using a 19mm socket to remove the lug nuts. It's a lot easier on my hands as I'm getting a little arthritic. Now that the wheel is off, you can put a jack stand underneath one of the large suspension knuckles below the rotor and another jack stand on the rocker panel underneath my wooden jig. This makes for a very safe setup. Here you can see where the two jack stands have been placed. Here's a close-up of the wooden jig. It's a 2x4 with a slot. I attached a piece of plywood on the other side with construction adhesive and a bunch of screws. Using only a 2x4 is not safe and will split. Now you can remove the two screws that hold the rotor in place. These are Torx T40s. The next thing is to remove the caliper bolts. They are 14mm. These are small bolts. Just remember, when you're putting them back in, you don't have to overdo it. I will check, but I'm pretty sure that they are installed at 20 foot-pounds, which really isn't a lot. The flexible hose to the caliper is very short. Remember, don't hang the caliper only using the brake hose. You'll damage it. When I examined the pads, they looked in great shape. They have worn evenly, and they're about 50% used. Remove the bolts that hold the caliper bracket. These are 15mm bolts. For these, I'm going to use a longer bar. Sometimes they're a little bit tight. I'm also trying to work around the camera to give you a better view. The bar makes it a little bit easier to remove them from an awkward position. Once the caliper bracket is off, you can remove the rotor. The last time I did this job, I lubricated the face of the bearing and the back of the rotor with some copper anti-seize. As you could see, it worked very well. There's no rust whatsoever. It was no problem getting it off. If you live in the Rust Belt and don't put any anti-seize on the back of the rotor, you can have a heck of a time getting it off. Looking at the caliper bracket, everything seems to be in good shape. Nothing seems to be broken. So I'm going to use some brake cleaner to loosen up the dirt. It just required a light brushing to clean it up. Also, I'm going to remove the copper anti-seize from the front of the bearing plate. Even the face looks perfect. It is mostly rust-free. Now, the caliper bracket is on the bench so you can remove the hardware. Make sure you have eye protection on, as parts can fly off in any direction. I used a small screwdriver to wedge them out. Top and bottom are exactly the same. Here I'm removing the pins that the caliper slides on. One is a little bit tight, so into the vise it went. Just a little bit of pulling and twisting and she came out pretty easily. It wasn't as tight as I thought it would be. I'm going to use this Permatech brake parts lubricant and all the hardware. This will be the first time using this product. Hopefully it works as good as the advertising states. This stuff is not supposed to melt up to 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit and will not harm any of the rubber parts or components. The trick to installing this hardware is to put it on an angle, start on the inside facing the pad, and press down on the outside where you see the spring. Right there, you could see the inside was clipped first, and then I pushed on the outside. For this clip, press it into place, and on the inside of the caliper bracket there's a small square hole where it will seat into. Fairly straightforward. After that, coat all of the surfaces with the lubricant. This will help prevent any squealing noise and also allow the pads to move freely. Darn, I forgot to clean the holes where the pins go in. It would have been better to do this prior to installing the hardware and lubricant. Just be careful if you do the same thing. When you spray the brake cleaner, try not to remove any of the lubricant. You can always add more if you do. I bought new rubber bits. The sleeve that goes on the caliper is there to help prevent noise coming from the pins during braking. From what I've read, people have not reinstalled these rubber pieces and had no problems. The rubber kit was not all that expensive, so I decided to keep it the same way it came from the factory. Make sure you get some lubricant on the ridge where the boot goes over it. This seems like a great spot for rust to form and allow water to penetrate. Clean any lubricant off the pin before you install the sleeve. This will ensure you get a good tight fit. Once the sleeve is on, then you can lubricate the pin. I'm glad I ordered the rubber parts. When I tried to put the pins in with the old sleeves on them, I could not get them in. They had swollen up. Make sure you get some lubricant in the boot so when you install it on the bracket, it will coat the ridge on the other side. Installing the boot with latex gloves on and lubricant on my fingers was a little tricky. I tried a couple of things and I found a small screwdriver worked very well. The boot is tough, but still be careful. You don't want to put a hole in it. The other method was to grip the boot with your thumb and forefinger and pull it over the ridge. That worked also. It probably would have been easier if I took my gloves off, but I wanted to see if it was doable. If the boot looks a little puffy, there's some air trapped in it, just push the caliper pin and pry the boot to let the air out. Coat the face of the flange where the rotor sits. I had run out of copper anti-seize, so I'm going to use this brake parts lubricant. It'll be a good test to see what it can do. Install the rotor, not forgetting to line up those 2 screw holes. Install the screws with a dab of lubricant on the threads. Now's a good time to clean up any excess lubricant. Next is the caliper bracket. Just a couple of drops of blue Loctite will do the trick. Starting the bolts by hand will ensure you don't cross-thread them. And the socket for this bolt is a 15 millimeter. I set my torque wrench at 60 foot-pounds. When checking the torque settings, I was getting a variation. Most of them were between 60 and 80 foot-pounds. I felt comfortable with 60 pounds and a couple drops of blue Loctite. It's not going anywhere. Every vehicle is different, so if you're into the torque wrench thing, you need to check the specifications that the manufacturer would recommend. The brake pads are next. It looks like I'm not sure what I'm doing, but I'm trying to work around the camera and don't have a good angle to see what's going on. If they get hung up, you need to slightly pull the edge of the hardware forward so the pad can slip in. I think you can see this on the video. So right at that point, I just pull that edge forward a hair, and then the pad slips in without any issues. Since the new pads are thicker than the existing worn ones, you need to press the piston back into the caliper. In the kit, these springs were supplied. These are designed to push the pads away from the rotor when you're not braking. I'm assuming they're there to prevent drag to get better gas mileage, or you're not going to wear the pads as fast. Again, that's the way they came from the factory, so I'll install them. Make sure you keep squeezing those pads together, or those springs will push them right out of the caliper. Once you get the caliper started, you can get your hand out of the way and get it positioned to put the bolts in. A couple drops of blue thread locker is on this 14mm bolt. That's all you need. After checking around, I found that most caliper bolts are set between 17 to 22 foot-pounds. I decided to set mine at 20 foot-pounds. It doesn't seem like a lot, but these bolts aren't all that big. If you overdo it, I believe you could easily snap the head off on them. Still using the brake caliper lubricant, I coated the inside of the wheel. It is aluminum, so when aluminum is in contact with steel, you will get corrosion. It can be a nightmare to get these wheels off, especially if you're in the rust belt. Install the wheel and snug up the lug bolts. When you're satisfied the wheel is flush against the rotor, you can remove your jack stands and lower it. Once it's on the floor, you can tighten the nuts to 100 foot-pounds. This setting came from my owner's manual. Always tighten in stages and go in a crisscross pattern. Now you need to seat the pads when complete. The hardest part is to find a stretch of road with hardly any cars. What I did was 3 or 4 stops in a row from 35 miles an hour to 5 miles an hour moderately. Then I drove 55 miles an hour, strong braking to 5 miles an hour 4 or 5 times. After that, I drove for 15 minutes without braking to let the pads cool down. The theory is to get brake pad material on the rotor, which gives you better braking, something I didn't know. It's been a couple of days and the brakes feel great. Doing your own brakes is very satisfying, plus you can save a lot of money. There's not a lot of tools required. The tools are run-of-the-mill and can be purchased at a reasonable price. Also, I'd like to say, when you're working on a vehicle and lifting it up and crawling around near it or underneath it, make sure it is absolutely safe. If you're not sure of what to do, find out. And if you're not comfortable, then don't do it. It's not worth it. If you like this video, please give me a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel, and as always, repair it. Don't wreck it. Thanks for watching.